I am in Winchester, Virginia.
Okay. Oh, beautiful country.
Beautiful Winchester, Virginia, the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Very beautiful country.
Uh, yeah, happily in retirement here. Shenandoah Valley, Shenandoah River. Beautiful, beautiful place to be. Wonderful little town that hasn't quite been discovered by the Washington, D.C. orbit. Nothing against them. I'm a D.C. guy, lived there all my life, lived and worked there practically all my life. Love DC, and I'm an hour and a quarter from the DC Beltway, but just enough to be outside of that orbit. And in this idyllic little town, not so little, 30,000 people. It's got everything I need.
Right.
And so anyway, that's where I reside now.
Okay. So the reason we're here with Hank today is because here in Brea, we're getting ready to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the momentous big game that included Walter Johnson and a few other baseball luminaries, Sam Crawford, Babe Ruth, Bob Meusel, on and on and on. And we're going to be celebrating it with a big game reenactment, but we can't do that without your insight. So I'd like to just start by you telling us a little bit, if you would, your family, your grandfather, what you know about him, knew about him, and how you came to be here today. Woo!
Well, okay. My mom was Walter Johnson's daughter. Her name was Carolyn Johnson Thomas, and I am Henry W. Hank Thomas, Walter Johnson's grandson. And I wrote a book about him that's still on Amazon. Mostly, not too many hard. I'm not even sure they're printing the hard copies anymore. I don't know, but almost all of the sales now are digital, Kindle, that kind of thing. But it's still available, and I'm not pushing it or anything. It's been around for almost 30 years. It's done well. It's there for anybody, and gives me great pleasure to know that it will be there always for anybody that wants to know as complete an account as I could dig up about his life and career. Um, I was in DC. I had the Library of Congress at my disposal, the greatest research facility in the world. And I spent years, first as a hobby, then started to take it a little more seriously as my notes accumulated, and uh, I got more and more excited about what I was finding out about his career, but also about him as a person. So that book was published in 1995 and has critics who have been very kind. You can get on Amazon and
A
see what.
wonderful book.
Oh,
Wonderful.
thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you so much,
Essential.
Chris. I
Essential.
appreciate that. Thank you. I mean, I put my heart and soul into it. It's, I never had any kids, so I say, well, that's my child. That's the best thing I've ever done in my
Your
life.
legacy. Yeah.
So
And it doesn't
Hank,
go back.
Hank, when did you first become aware of your grandfather's legacy? Do you remember an age where you began to really get a sense of what he was, who he was? Tell us a little bit about your personal connection within the family and how that first came to you.
sure. Well, as a DC kid, um, I was a baseball fan, and I would see in books, those classic books from my youth, Big Time Baseball, my greatest day in baseball. Uh, that how highly regarded he was. And that gave me, now I was 8 months old when he died, so I did not know him. And my grandmother had died in 1930, the great tragedy of his life. She was 36 years old.
Right.
They had truly a a love affair for the ages. I mean, it's just everything that everybody dreams about. They met each other, and that was that. And it was a kind of a strange match because he was a ball player. He'd been a farm boy. He didn't have a lot of education, but you know what? He's 25 years old. He's handsome as the day is long. He's the star of the Washington baseball team, and he's quite the celebrity in D.C. My grandmother, was 19. She was a debutante. She was a congressman's daughter.
Right.
Hazel Roberts was her name. She was beautiful with these enormous hazel eyes. I could just imagine when those things fluttered at him, how his heart must have soared. But I can also imagine her looking at him and just going,
Wow.
oh, yes, wow, is exactly right. He's a big guy, but he was gentle, he was modest, he was kind. Just the accounts of his personality are amazing. And that never changed. That never changed. And it blew everybody's minds. I mean, it just, for all of his fame, and, he's making tremendous money, and he could walk around like, I'm the cat's meow. I'm it. All he had to do really was look in the mirror. And yet it was exactly the opposite. Everybody just said, well, they said about his baseball, if he ever realized his place in the game, in the scheme of things in baseball, you couldn't tell. You couldn't tell. There was no indication of it. He was just another guy. So anyway, so they fell in love. They were both staying at what they called an apartment hotel in D.C. and uh, uh, kind of swank, a little bit swank digs. Congressman, her father was the sole congressman from Nevada. They only had one. They had two senators, but there was nobody lived there. No population, so they only had one representative, and that was an incredibly interesting fellow called E. E. Roberts, Edwin E. Roberts, who was a congressman for a number of years and then became the mayor of Reno for a long, long time. And E. E. Roberts, of all things, Walter Johnson's father-in-law, if you can name one person, he was a libertarian, was his political point of view.
Wow.
And if you could name one person in the history of Nevada politics, if you've ever wondered, well, how did Nevada, Utah had to change all their ways, their Mormon ways that were a little outside the mainstream to become a state, to get, to get ratified as a state. How did Nevada manage to keep gambling, prostitution, no taxes, all these kind of they got to keep those and be a state too. Well, my great grandfather, E. E. Roberts, is the guy.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Very
And,
interesting.
of all things, he was just a libertarian, and he thought, well, they're gonna do it anyway. And of course, was a great political uh, point of view in terms he got every time he ran for anything, he got reelected, elected, reelected. The people loved him. I mean, they loved that. Get let the people do what they want as long as it's a divorce, easy divorce. Uh, People have been going to Reno. I think they might still for a quickie divorce.
Right.
Certainly quickie weddings.
Don't you know? And I think he said once he thought it should be a lot harder for people to get married and easier to get divorced. And it's just the opposite, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's kind of the background on my family, but I didn't know them, so they were pictures on the wall.
Right.
But I had the books, and then when I was old enough, mom, because she lived in D.C., Uncle Ed had a big farm just outside of Washington. He was a farm boy, and but he didn't want to come off the farm. There would be these old timers days uh, at Griffith Stadium with the ball club, with the Washington team, and there's a big memorial there that was erected in '47 that President Truman called Clark Griffith and asked if he could come and dedicate that memorial. He said, Truman, who grew up in Missouri, said, Walter Johnson was my hero as a youth. So mom would go in. I'm like 7 years old, 9 years old. I remember meeting Clark Griffith. He took me by the hand, and the two of us went up in this tiny little elevator up to his office all the way on the second floor, and he doted on me.
Mm.
I remember one time sitting in the owner's box behind the dugout, and Calvin Griffith, who was the owner at that Clark Griffith had died, Calvin Griffith caught a foul ball and turned around and handed it to me.
Mm.
And then when I was a little bit older, me and my buddies would take the streetcar. There were streetcars in DC, and we would take the streetcar, went directly from where I lived, pretty much, to Griffith Stadium. And we would stop at the Walter Johnson Memorial. And, I mean, pretty cool to have my buddies say, hey,
Oh.
that's your grandfather.
Yeah.
And, I'm like, yeah, that's grandpa. So I didn't really, because they weren't around. And my mom and my aunt and uncles didn't talk about his career. If there was any talk, and I wouldn't have paid attention to it as a kid, it was just about he was their father. And mom in particular was born in 23. She doesn't remember anything of his pitching career. He retired in 1927. She remembers his managing career because he would take her and her sister on these road trips just to keep him company. And she has some fabulous stories, of which I'll tell you one that you'll enjoy, that's quite short but wonderful. They're in Cleveland. He managed Washington for 4 years, and then he managed Cleveland for 3 years. And he had a rough time at Cleveland. He did well. He did very well at Washington. Great record, but you're there for a few years, you don't win a pennant. Time for a change. So that's what happened in Washington. Then he goes to Cleveland, and he did well, but they had good teams, just like at Washington, and the press and the fans are like, well, why aren't we winning a pennant? So, okay. In one stretch in particular, I guess they'd been on a losing streak or something, and thereafter, it's like, we have to get a new manager. Walter Johnson's just not doing the job. So mom and her sister, Noni, her youngest sister, mom would have been 11. Noni would have been 8, I guess. And someone from the hotel comes to their room and says, young ladies, Babe Ruth is in room such and such, and he has asked to see you, girls. And they're going, what? They follow this fella up to the Babe's room. The Babe is laid up. He's hurt his leg. He's in the Yankees are at Cleveland playing a series. The Babe has hurt his leg, and he's in bed with his leg propped up. And mom and her sister are like, what in the world is this about? So Babe Ruth calls him over to the bedside, and he says, "Now listen, if you girls ever hear anything bad about your father, about your dad, you tell them that Babe Ruth says that you're full of bunk. Because I want to tell you that he's just a great, great man. And you tell him from the Babe. The Babe had read the paper that morning. And there's all this stuff about, Walter's got to go. We need a new manager, blah, blah, blah. He's a terrible man, he's too easygoing. He's this, that, and the other thing. So they leave, and mom says, we're looking at each other, and, we're going, we know how great he is. He's our dad. We love him. We know, but gosh, what was that all about? So wow. Anyway, that's the kind of memories that mom and
wait, I want to interrupt you really quick.
Sure.
Chris, yeah. You need to introduce yourself. I'm not quite sure, Hank, that you know who Chris Epting is, but he's one of our local heroes. He's a phenomenal local historian, a very prolific author, TV personality, media genius.
Yeah. We have either talked to each other or
we have. When I first,
yeah.
We have a little history together. Thank you for remembering it. It was a pleasure to talk to you. It's funny, and I'm sitting here with a 1921 Walter Johnson card I wanted to show you.
Oh my gosh.
But hey, you brought up Babe Ruth, and we'd be remiss if we didn't get into this a little bit. This game anniversary coming up. For starters, people in Orange County, when you mention that Walter Johnson went to Fullerton High School, most people don't believe you until you lay it out. Walter Johnson always thought of as Kansas and the Midwest. They don't realize he really came of age in Orange County. Yeah. And began playing baseball. So I want to talk about that for a minute or two. But then the game, that we're celebrating, the fact that in 1924, Walter Johnson and Babe Ruth found themselves in Olinda, now called Brea, really in terms of county history here. And there's a lot of great baseball history here, but nothing like that. To me, that really is the most monumental special event. And look, you had a World Series one here in 2002. A lot of great baseball history, but Babe Ruth and Walter Johnson, I don't think there's any real topping that. What do you know about the game, about your grandfather's history in Orange County? Give us a little bit about the Orange County connection that you're familiar with.
Well, he started pitching there. He didn't pitch in Kansas.
No.
They're on a pioneer farm.
Right.
Standard 160 acres. Here's this land. Make of it what you will. And I always thought part of a lot of his attitude, his personality, came from his father, and what Walter saw of his father. Here's a guy that wrested a living, not just a living, but supported a wife and 6 kids on this 160 acres. You have to do, you couldn't just drive to the grocery store or drive to the doctor or drive to the hardware store or anything like that. I mean, you had to be able to do it all.
Right.
And I always thought that Walter probably, when people would say, "Well, gosh, you've really done something here," that he was probably thinking to himself, "What have I done? I can throw a baseball fast. You know, you want to see somebody that can do something? Look at my dad.
Uh,
Look at my dad. He can do anything." I feel that way about my father, who could fix or build anything. He was of that generation. He was born in 1912, and he was of that generation. And he was always trying to show me how to do stuff. And all I wanted to do was get to the playground, and play sports and whatnot. So anyway, um, then they moved to California. They got driven off the farm by a drought after all that work. I mean, he built a house, great big house, uh, tilled that land, made it into something, and then, what do? You're a farmer, and it just won't rain for a couple years, and so uh, his father, right at that time, this is 1901, not his father, his Walter's uncle, his father's brother, had somehow made his way to Southern California and had work in the oil fields.
right.
And had told his brother, Frank, Walter's father, about, oh my gosh, they're hiring like crazy. There's jobs. They can't build these oil derricks fast enough, that kind of thing.
Right.
Cars have come along. So Frank went out there to investigate, see what it was like, and then went back and brought the family. Just thought having a steady job. He went to work for the Santa Fe Railroad, which is delivering all this oil. And as what they call a teamster, he drove a cart, probably with barrels of oil or whatever, horse drawn. That was that time. So there's Walter. He's 14. And he starts to play ball. And at first in kids' games. And as he put it, this is the way he put it. He said, "The first time I ever picked up a baseball and threw it, everything just seemed to work all together." Mm-hmm. Understatement of the century, maybe. But
that happens also, probably in, I think Carbon Canyon, where they lived, is probably where that.
Oh, you're frozen. Come back, Chris. Come back.
Yes, the flat. They called it the flat,
right,
where the kids played. Yeah. And Linda, says she knows where it is. And I think me and my cousin Chuck Carey, who lived there and did a lot of research, he dug up Walter's first game when he was 16. And I wouldn't have done it. I went back and back and back. And after a few months, okay, there's no, in those little town newspapers, no, there's no Johnson. Chuck kept going and found a game. And it turns out his father told him, he was 16, he said, "When you turn 17,
right." And
his father was a big fan of the Olinda team. He said, "When you turn 17, I'll let you start playing. These are older guys. They're rough. They go on the road. They drink a lot, whatever.
They're oil men."
Yes. So really, Walter pitches one game, 3 innings, struck out 6, and then it's 6 months before he pitches and it hooks on to the Olinda team. Then in the spring, he's pitching for both Olinda and the high school.
Right.
in high school, for whom he pitched some amazing games. But that's how Walter got started. And there was no period of development to his natural talent. None, zero, that I could come up with. He said he would stop, he would help his father, and he would stop the cart and uh, pick up rocks and throw them against a fence, he said, just as practice. But for some reason, and if you watch the film of Walter Johnson throwing, you've never seen anybody else throw like that.
Right.
No.
Nobody. There have been
No
sidearm
effort. Very easy.
100
No
pitches.
effort.
He did. He whipped the ball.
Yeah.
He left his hind leg behind him,
Yeah.
which everybody that sees those films goes, he didn't even follow through. He
He
didn't
didn't
have
fall through. He had that snapping motion. It really is unique.
it's incredible. And everything about it was, and I think that leaving that right leg behind when he threw the ball instead of having
A lot of freeze.
controlled the ball. And his arm did the rest. And he learned that if he left that leg there and didn't bring it kind of wildly forward like all pitchers do, he had would have better control. But it was a natural talent. It was a once of a century talent. He had very long arms,
Yeah.
and that was that. He was a catcher in these kids' games. He started as a catcher with Olinda. Wasn't long though before anybody that had that live arm that pitchers have get hey, let's try him pitching, and it just was a
Yeah.
natural gift that he had, that he could pitch. Now he was a wonderful athlete in general, although he didn't play any other sports that I'm aware of. But he was a great hitter for a pitcher, great fielder. He's still got records in both of those areas, believe it or not, for a pitcher. He holds the record for the highest batting average for a pitcher in a season,
Right.
1925, his 19th year in the big league. So big strapping guy, well coordinated. Mom said Dad did everything well. Riding a horse, driving a car, he made everything that he did look natural and effortless. So, that was his makeup.
Well, for people in Orange County, I mean, he begins playing for Santa Ana. He plays a lot of local baseball before leaving, really makes a name for himself. Back then, Fullerton High School in would have I played, I believe, where Amaridge Park is today, the same basic configuration. So he's leaving his mark all over the county. But then near the end of his career, obviously, after that 1924 season, that incredible season, he comes home and he comes home in a big way and plays this mythical game. When did you become aware of the game that we're celebrating? And what do you know about it that maybe people watching this wouldn't be aware of?
Well, a lot of my research was focused on 1924,
Right.
and it was fun to look at. Now, he had he was recognized pretty early on, as he kind of took over from first. Cy Young was recognized as the greatest pitcher that had been. Organized baseball started in seriousness in the 1870s.
Right.
You know, the same basic rules. Some things changed around like 1890. Everything kind of got pretty well stabilized in terms of the game, and pretty much, you know, the same as it is today. Cy Young, great pitcher of the 1890s and 1900s. He was the greatest. Then Christy Mathewson comes along
Right.
around 1900. Great, great pitcher. He was the college boy, very handsome guy. He was the greatest pitcher. Didn't take Walter long. Around 1910, 11, Walter's starting to have these phenomenal
Right.
for these terrible teams. And Walter's putting up numbers that you wouldn't believe. I mean, they just seem like, you know, science fiction. So pretty soon, and you know, I would encounter along about 1912, 13, when Walter really, I mean, he was 36 and 7 in 1913. It's a not very good team. I don't think they had a
Right.
300 hitter. And you dig into the numbers, and they're just, you know, he was 33 and 12 in 1912. So at that point, you start seeing articles titled "King of the Pitchers." Here's Walter Johnson. You know, things like that, where it's kind of the passing of Matty was Christy Mathewson was kind of coming into a bit of a decline. Still great, but not the Matty of earlier years. So it was kind of you know, by 24, you know, it's not like Walter was being overlooked or anything like that, but he never got into a World Series because he was playing for bad teams, and you know, you got to get on that stage, as they call it, that national stage. You
Right.
know, the World Series. Baseball was the biggest sport. The World Series was the biggest thing. The whole country, it didn't matter where you lived. You know, the World Series was huge. Everybody followed it in the newspapers. There wasn't any radio, no TV, but everybody knew the great players and they knew how great Walter was. It's just he hadn't. So here in 24 is this miraculous season and even more miraculous World Series.
Right.
Astonishing, astonishing. I mean, I will put that World Series and in particular that seventh game.
Mhm.
I have no problem making the case for that as the greatest single game of baseball
Mhm.
ever.
Mhm.
The drama, but
I get it.
a lot of the drama was that Walter Johnson was in the World Series for the first time. This beloved character, great pitcher, coming to the end. He has announced that he's going to retire at the beginning of this is going to be his last year. Somehow the Senators beat out the Yankees, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, the Tigers, Ty Cobb, Harry Heilmann. You know, it's like, whoa, these two great teams. The Senators put it together under the leadership of the boy wonder manager, they called him. Bucky Harris was 26. And they win the pennant, the American League pennant. And then, you know, this incredible World Series. So after that, Walter Johnson actually supplants Babe Ruth for a year or two as the biggest baseball hero in the country. And especially because the Senators win again in 25 and prove that it was no fluke. And, you know, it looks like, well, maybe this is the dynasty, the new dynasty coming along. The Yankees had won 3 pennants in a row from 21 through 23. Now the Senators win in 24, 25. So after the 24 series, Walter's going around and he is on top of the world, certainly the baseball world. And so it was everywhere he went. And he had been for many years going home to Coffeyville, Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
He had bought, his family wanted to go back to Kansas from California, living in the oil fields, steady work. But you see those pictures of those hills dotted with the oil derricks, and probably not the greatest place to live. I mean,
Smelly, noisy,
uh,
dangerous. No,
absolutely.
no
So,
bueno.
so Walter in early 1910, with three major league salaries behind him now, buys a farm in Kansas for his family back in Kansas, not in Humboldt where he was born, but in Coffeyville,
Right.
which is 60 miles south. So Coffeyville is right on the border. It's on there's a four-state border there between Kansas,
Right.
Oklahoma to the south, Arkansas just to the right, and Missouri uh, right there. So he would travel. He would come home that started in 1912, where he would go home, and the weather in Kansas would be mild for another few weeks into October. And the Washington team was never in the World Series, so he would go home usually around the beginning of October and keep pitching for 2 or 3 weeks or a month. And he would go in all these states. He would go around, and they would pay him to come in and pitch an exhibition game, and it would be Walter and maybe some couple other major and minor league players from the area that they would pay, and then they would fill out the team with local boys, and they would play a neighboring team, which would do the same. They'd have a couple ringers and the local guys, and those were great to research. I mean, great fun to see. They were very exciting events in the communities. Well, there he is. Okay, now he goes to Southern California, not to do that, but to buy a minor league team. He thought it was time for him go out on top. He had the World Series money. He had lots of money. He wanted to buy a minor league team and become a team owner and manager. He would manage the team. He wanted to, like most major league players, after sitting on the bench and watching baseball games for 21 years and what worked and what didn't work, he thought, he would make a pretty good manager. So, uh, but in conjunction with that, uh, he played a number of games, exhibition games.
Right, all across the country.
All well, no, he kind of went from Kansas to L.A. and
Northern California.
yeah, pitched a number pretty directly, I think, and pitched. The family went with him, and he was going to have meetings with the Vernon team in the Pacific Coast League was
Right. Right.
up
Right.
for sale. Um, let's see, the Oakland team was up for sale. And as soon as they found out that Walter Johnson was interested in buying one of the minor league teams, more teams became available. They knew he had money, and maybe they weren't doing so well in the PCL. But while he was there, he played a number of exhibition games. The biggest of which was what's come to be known as the Brea Bowl game, in conjunction with the huge Anaheim parade that had been going on, the Halloween parade that had been going on for some years. And it just happened that Babe Ruth was there playing exhibition games up and down the coast. They had the same agent, Christy Walsh
Christy
was
Walsh.
the fellow's name, and he was the first sports agent.
Yep.
He pioneered that field with Babe Ruth.
He built Babe Ruth's brand in a lot of ways. He really was responsible.
Yes.
So
yes, and he had hired Walter, so famous now after such a great World Series, to write a 60-part, to write quote unquote. He had a ghostwriter, of course, but the information came from him. A 60-part autobiographical series that Christy Walsh syndicated to hundreds of newspapers around the country. So they had the same agent, and Christy Walsh arranges the Brea Bowl game. Here's Walter Johnson, the hero of the recent World Series, against Babe Ruth, who hadn't pitched a game in years, but the Babe, and all you had to tell the Babe was apparently, you're going to pitch this one, and he's like, great, because he was a pitcher, way before he was a slugger, so, and a great pitcher. Yeah. He for 5 years, Walter Johnson had been the best right-handed pitcher in the American League, and Babe Ruth had been the best left-handed pitcher in the American League. I mean, he'd be in the Hall of Fame today as a pitcher if he'd kept at it. So that game got put together. Southern California, I mean, one of the secrets to Walter's future success when he started pitching in these California Winter Leagues, semi-pro leagues, town ball, was that these teams had a lot of major and minor league players that went home to Southern California and played so they could play all year, and they got paid to play all year. And so there was a whole roster full of those guys, both on Walter's team and on Babe's team. And, that got promoted. I mean, how much more did you need to say than Babe Ruth is going to be pitching in a pitching matchup against Walter Johnson?
Right.
And, this huge crowd showed up, and it was just, it was a glorious event. The game, not so much. I think Walter was just tired. His arm, he had pitched so much. And, the Babe hadn't pitched a game since 1920 or something. So his arm is, but anyway, no, nobody cared. The Babe hit a couple of enormous blasts, and, you got to see guys like Sam Crawford, Hall of Famer today, and other players that were living around there that got enlisted, paid probably to appear in this game. And I mean, it was just one of the biggest things that ever happened.
I think it's really important to note, though, that, and you touched on it earlier, that Walter Johnson had the personality of just a really great guy. He was a humble, kind-hearted man. And for Fay Lewis, who was a friend from Olinda days, who was now this big honcho with the Anaheim Elks, to turn around and say, hey, can you help me out with this fundraiser? Let's put together a game. And then the call goes to, Ruth's manager and such. And
I didn't remember it was a fundraiser. I did not remember
the
that.
Anaheim Elks, yeah.
Okay.
But if he was not of that personality, if he was, full of himself, he'd just come off the World Series, he's Walter Johnson, he might not have done that. But he was the man that he was. He was a kind-hearted, gentle spirit. And so sure, come on, let's do it. And they did it in Brea and not Anaheim because, the Brea Chamber of Commerce had put together this phenomenal baseball park, the Brea Bowl, which they built years before Brea even became a city.
Let me tell you a short story. Okay, Walter wins the seventh game of the 24 World Series. He goes out to dinner with Hazel.
Right.
They're interrupted by somebody comes in with a bag of telegrams, dumps on their table, congratulatory telegrams.
Yeah.
Then Walter gets on a train. This is the moment of his greatest glory. Gets on a train to go up to Schenectady, New York, to play in a charity game the next day.
Right.
Because the Washington coach, Al Schacht,
Asked him.
who was very friendly with, had asked, knew a couple who were going to lose their house. Their house was going to be foreclosed because they couldn't make the mortgage. And Schacht had asked a number of ball players if they would go up. Now, none of them knew, including Walter, that it was going to be the day. This was a month before the season finished that Walter agreed to do this.
Yeah.
And how many ball players would have said, gee, Al, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I told you I'm tired. And Washington was just going crazy. It had to be such great fun to be there at that moment. And imagine that you're Walter Johnson at that moment. And just to soak it all in and whatever, and would have just said, I'm sorry, I would have gone to the train station and said, you know, Al, give them my best wishes. And I'd be happy to donate, whatever. Walter was an easy touch. You know what? He got on that train with several other Washington players and left that all night celebration, as it turned out to be, to go up and honor their commitment.
Yeah. It's like Truman said, he was a champion on and off the field. He really was a rare person.
I love that expression. Yes, because it's true. It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
In those rare photographs that George Outland took,
incredible. When I saw those,
that's where you and I first connected, I think, when I got those photos. And in those images, you see how your grandfather presents and comports himself. You see, he's he's just very noble there, and he's being very accommodating. You can see those images really, I mean, of all the pictures you've seen of your grandfather, those had to be really special, right?
I mean, people called him a prince of a man.
Yeah.
They did, tried to, he was, not a lot of education, farm boy. He walked to the mound and back. The sports writers all used the same expression, like he was walking behind a plow, because that's what he did for
years.
And no, he is always in the moment, because there's no wild to him. There's no agenda. Yeah. He's there. Another short story I think you'll enjoy. He's retired from baseball. He's got a big farm out in Germantown, Maryland.
Right.
500 and some acres, just outside of DC. Well, it's just outside now, with Route 270, but it was country back then. And so Mom said she would see him putting on his suit, and she'd go, hey, Dad, where are you going? And he said, well, they've asked me to dedicate the shopping center someplace. And she could tell he wasn't crazy about coming off the farm to do this, driving in, on these country roads, going to someplace. And he'd always say, he called her Sis. That was her nickname. He'd say, hey, Sis, why don't you come along with me? And he just wanted a little company. So She did. She always loved, being with him, and she would go to these events with him. And she said, "Oh gosh, it was such fun. We'd be stopped at a light, and you'd just hear people, 'Hey, Walter!' They'd see him sitting in his car. 'Hey, Walter!' Wave, and he'd say, 'Hi, how are you?' And then they'd get to some banquet or some affair or another, and he would walk in, and of course, you can imagine. And Mom said everything would stop, and you can imagine you're in a room, and Mickey Mantle walks into the room, or Ted Williams, or Cal Ripken Jr., or Derek Jeter.
Oh, Joe Pepitone. He was my favorite.
There you go. Yes, everything stops. Everybody looks. You know, that's which is one of the downsides of celebrity. I've always thought, you're like that scientific principle that observing a phenomenon changes it,
Right.
and so you don't get to live an ordinary life like other people do, and just walk around and experience things, uh, from as they were before you got there. And but anyway, that's a whole other thing. But so he would go around the room and say, the people would come up to him, and he'd say, uh, "Hi," or "Hello, I'm Walter Johnson," and shake their hand. And they would say, I mean, they're freaking out, of course, but "I'm so and so." And so Mom one time asked him, I guess they're driving back from one of these things, and she said, why do you introduce yourself as Walter Johnson? Everybody knows who you are. And he said, "Well, yeah, I know that, but I don't want them to think that I presume that they know who I am." Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How humble.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What can you say about a guy like
Really
that?
Wow.
So,
Hank, did you I have this baseball card here I showed you. Do you have any of your grandfather's effects or artifacts? Was that important to you to, like in your collection?
yes. Uh, Not anymore. We had some amazing things that came down. When he died, the all of the memorabilia, the stuff, got divided among. There was 5 children. The boys were the oldest. 2 boys, my Uncle Walter Jr. and Uncle Ed. They got first pick. I think Bobby, the next oldest, the boy, okay, then he got a pick, and then Mom and her sister kind of got what's left.
Mhm.
There was so much great stuff, otherworldly
Yeah.
memorabilia. I mean, when you consider that it's Walter Johnson.
Right.
So, and we got the scrapbooks, which just had, you know, were how I got. You asked me before how I first became aware of his stature in the game. And as I uh, detail in the introduction to my book,
Right.
I was in my 30s, and I was at Mom's house, and we these scrapbooks, to call them scrapbooks, there was 30 of them. They were enormous, in the style of the day. Scrapbooking was a big hobby,
Right.
not just for famous people, but for keep everything. You have a ticket, you've gone to such and such,
Right.
you win a ribbon for doing this or that, and put it in a book, preserve it. Well, my grandmother was fastidious about it, and I think she loved it. She loved him, and in addition to there was four Washington newspapers, and then she had people, friends of hers, sending her articles and artifacts from around the country, and she just kept everything. In fact, we had in the scrapbooks what I believe to be the only full ticket to the seventh game of the 1924 World Series that exists. Now,
Wow.
you never know, things pop up, but it was in the scrapbooks. And I know for a fact that 5,000 people were lined up early in the morning, the day of that seventh game, to try to get what few tickets
Mhm.
were available. And you could imagine anyone with any pull whatsoever, because what they did was they sold a strip of three tickets. This is clever Clark Griffith, the penny pinching owner of the Washington Senators. Great human being, by the way, but he never had a lot of money. So he sold a strip of tickets to games one, two, and six to the World Series. And, there's no guarantee, there wasn't any guarantee that game six, you could get a refund for your game six ticket. And there was no printed ticket to game seven because not many World Series made it.
9 to 7.
So they printed those, after they won game six and tied the series at 3-3, 3 games to 3. Then they printed the tickets overnight. And there was like anybody in Washington you can imagine that had to pull to get a ticket to that game, including President Coolidge and his wife. And they said half of Congress was there, the Supreme Court was there. I mean, any Washingtonians, this was just going to be, one of the great events in the history of Washington. So here's this full ticket in our scrapbooks, and I thought, well, gosh, how is it that didn't get used? And then a light bulb went off in my head, and it's like that was her ticket, that was my grandmother's ticket, and she walked in with him. And who's going to ask Walter Johnson's wife for her ticket to the game? It's like, come on
Where
in.
is it? Where's the ticket today?
Well, we sold it. We auctioned it. We have auctioned. Okay, when Mom went into 24-hour care at my sister's house, Mom had said she never wanted to be in an institution.
Mm.
She was very independent. She was in her own house, the house I grew up in, until she was 92. Then she couldn't take care of herself anymore. And we helped her stay in that house for years. And then she moved in. My sister and her husband have a big house in McLean, Virginia, and they made a living area. And she had 24-hour care there. Well, you can imagine what that cost. So Mom said, sell the stuff. He said, and I was okay with that. When it came down to between me as, a Walter Johnson fan and also as a collector, I had my own collection, but different kinds of stuff. The family stuff was always different to me. I like the stuff. I have the collector's mentality. So I collected the cards, the tchotchkes, the stuff that would come out on the open market. And anyway, doing keeping that stuff and having my mom get the best care possible. How hard a decision do you think that was? So anyway, we had several big auctions and auctioned off all the great awards, trophies, the big time stuff, including that ticket, which hammered at it's either 12 or $15,000 a single ticket. The only one known to that game. So that's where that stuff went. And, I mean, so then my collection just, I may have sent to you, Linda, a link to an article in the Winchester paper about, I donated to the Humboldt archives. There's going to be a museum there dedicated. There was two great baseball players that came from Humboldt, Kansas. One was Walter and the other was George Sweat, a Negro League player. And it's one of the many amazing coincidences of my grandfather's career that he was in the 1924 White World Series, and George Sweat, also from Humboldt, this tiny little town, 3,000 people. He was in the 1924 Negro League World Series playing for the Kansas City Monarchs, of all things.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a museum. I'm not sure if it's going to be, I think it's going to be more general than just the two ball players. But anyway, my stuff that I had collected over the years, some wonderful display items, ads, advertising pieces, pins, things like that. I have donated to that undertaking.
Nice.
And money behind it, and I have enough confidence that the granddaughter of a dear friend of mine, with whom I worked on a bunch of Humboldt projects many years ago, she has just gotten obsessed with this whole situation, and she's already done some wonderful things there in Humboldt, and she's going to get this thing done, and so she's got my stuff.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well,
so
Hank,
that's where the memorabilia went.
Well, when you find any more, remember we'd love some in Brea.
Well, I wanted to show Chris what I showed you. I got this off of eBay some time ago and just dug it out. And it's a picture of a couple of guys. I believe this to be an original postcard from the period of two guys in Olinda uniform.
Olinda jersey. Wow.
With the ballpark in the background.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
You can recognize the ballpark.
If these were teammates of Walter, contemporaries, or they might be a year or two later, but you look at the uniforms and they're definitely in that
incredible
time frame. Isn't that cool?
It's incredible, Hank. Just amazing.
So I'm sending that to Linda, giving her.
Hank, it's been so much fun catching up with you. I mean, again, the Centennial was a really big deal locally, and you're really the most important legacy part of the puzzle. You're the connection to all of it.
Wish I could be out there.
Oh, we do too.
Yes, we most certainly do.
Can we
find some company that's willing to fly me out and put me out?
Oh my gosh.
I'm there. I'll be there.
Linda, we should talk offline about that. I think it would be great. I think
so.
Maybe we can continue that part of the conversation, because honestly, Hank, I mean, that really, your presence at something like this event would really push it over the top. So we can continue that offline and see what that looks like.
Yeah. What are the dates?
October 26th. It's a Saturday.
Okay, great. Plenty of time. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
I thought the parades had stopped. Anaheim
still No, they've been doing it every year. It's gotten quite big now. In fact, my son marched in that parade for 4 years when he was in high school.
Wonderful.
All the high school bands played there. Yeah,
Babe Ruth and Walter Johnson were in that parade.
they were the very first parade. They were the
It was
first parade.
24.
Yeah,
Amazing.
Yeah,
it's been
first
going
one
on for
marching
100
down
years.
from the train station and all that and getting changed.
I
Well,
know that was a big deal in 24. That was a huge deal. I
oh,
mean, because
massive.
yeah.
Well, Melinda, what do you think?
Well, I had one question, and I know we're running out of time, but I have to ask you. I know your uncle gave the baseball collection, the presidential signed baseballs, to the Hall of Fame when your grandfather passed, and blah 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 years later, and you went to the Hall of Fame in '77 with the idea that maybe you were going to start doing some research on that great man in your family, and you were being treated like royalty, got the personal tour, and ended up in the presidential room and had a stroke. Please tell us more.
Chris, have you read my article in the Post magazine about
I
that?
did. I did.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, what a story. I mean, to come across this, I'm just looking to write a good book about the guy, and yes, I can remember a couple of times being at the farm. Uncle Ed would bring out that mahogany box that had a couple of pens in it that was made up to hold the very first presidential opening day pitch, which took place in 1910. President Taft, there's a whole backstory to that.
Right.
Right.
He got driven out of the White House. He made a speech. He had 300 of the country's leading suffragists, as they called them at the time, and he proceeded to tell them that he didn't think that women were prepared to vote, qualified to vote, and they hooted him. They literally hooted and and rightly so, hooted and booed him off the stage at the White House. He stomped down the hallway to the vice president's office, Sheridan, and said, "We're going to the ball. They're opening the season today. Let's get out of here. We're going to the ball game." So they went, totally unexpected. Taft was a huge guy. They had to find, he wouldn't fit in the
Right.
stadium chair. So they
Right.
found an armchair somewhere and brought it down and put it there. And the Washington manager, Jimmy McAleer, got the idea. Well, let's have the president throw the ball to the pitcher to start the game. Well, guess who the pitcher was to start the game? Walter Johnson, 22 years old. He's in his fourth year. He's starting his fourth year with Washington. Catches the ball. He was young, but he wasn't. He wasn't. He knew enough. He was smart enough not to actually use that use that ball for the
In the
game
game.
as was intended. And he took it back to the dugout and he hit it someplace. And the next day, an acquaintance who worked in the White House took it and had William Taft, the president, sign it. So that started the tradition every year after that into well, Washington lost their team in 1972. So that started to make it sporadic. Presidents would go to Baltimore after that. It's gotten to be a very sketchy thing these days. But for many, many years, the president had to go to the opening day and throw out there. It was just expected of him. It's just an all-American thing to do. And why wouldn't you? In 24, Coolidge was up for reelection. So why wouldn't you present yourself as whereas actually his wife Grace was
She was a big baseball fan.
She kept score and everything. Coolidge,
Right.
I don't think could tell you a baseball from a football, but anyway, so Walter ended up with a collection of 6 baseballs from different presidents. You had Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, and then from somewhere, from some event, Teddy Roosevelt signed the ball and put it in the collection. So I saw that collection a couple times. Uncle Ed had the collection. I saw it a couple times at the farm. Uncle Ed would bring it out and we'd look at it and wow, look at that. Look at all these presidents. In 1968, Uncle Ed donated it to the Hall of Fame, which is where it deserved to be. They created a room around it called the President's Room with a display case with the balls in and the mahogany box that somebody made up for Taft to hold the Taft ball and the pen that Taft signed the ball with, just coincidentally was big enough to hold 6 baseballs. So it was kind of perfect. So in 1977, I start to get more curious. Oh, well, okay. I'll try to. So at some family gathering, I'm in my early 30s. I'm at mom's house. I had never done this as a youth. Open up one of the cabinets in our living room and pulled out one of those scrapbooks and started going through it. They sat there untouched for years and years. I don't know why. That's just crazy. And I started reading. I pulled out one of the 1924 books. Oh my gosh, I had no idea. I mean, yes, he was one of the great pitchers of all time. I didn't know about him as a person. Here's all these accounts. You know, it was almost like people couldn't wait to get finished talking about how great he was as a pitcher to talk about how wonderful he was as a man, as a human being. So started as a hobby. I'm working. I've got a family, but I've got the Library of Congress there in DC, and I start going down there, kind of haunting the place when I had time. And in 1977, I went up to Cooperstown to see what I guess I had probably called, and they say, "Oh yeah, we've got some pretty big Walter Johnson files." So I go up there. It was the off season for the Hall of Fame, so I pretty much had the place to myself. Delightful time of year. It was the World Series was going on. I stayed in the 250-year-old Tunnicliffe Inn across the street with the floors, the old wooden floors. You had to be careful where you stepped. It's a fabulous, fabulous trip, and I'm treated like royalty by Ken Smith. The Hall of Fame had become kind of a retirement home for prominent old sports writers. And Ken Smith was one, very well known in his time. Jack Redding was another. He was the librarian. The Hall of Fame was staffed by these old guys who had found their dream job and were qualified for it because they were baseball guys. And so Ken Smith is giving me a tour. And we come to the president's room, and there's these blow up pictures of all the presidents uh, throwing out the first pitch. There's a display case with what they called the green light letter from World War II that Franklin Roosevelt sent to Clark Griffith, authorizing the continuation of baseball as a what do they call it, a essential industry.
Right.
to the country. And of course, Roosevelt had been a huge baseball fan as a youth and had been in Washington for 8 years as assistant Navy secretary in the teens and had gotten to know Clark Griffith very well. And Griffith, if Roosevelt needed any talking to, and the letter describes how, you know, everybody that's working in the war effort, this is like 1942, they all need entertainment. They all need a break. And baseball, you know,
Is the break.
would provide that. So I am authorizing baseball to continue as an essential end. Oh, wow. To see that letter. Oh my gosh. Incredible. So here's another display case. And we walk up to it, and here's the box. Here's that beautiful mahogany box open, and there's no balls. What there was a magazine opened to an article about the balls with the picture of the balls side by side and no balls. And if you remember from my article, I opened the article by saying, where are the balls? Where are the balls? Well, we're building a new wing. There was a lot of blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, okay, fine. I was immediately suspicious, and I was going to be there for a couple of days going through the Johnson files, and I said, well, when you find them, I'd like to see them. So lo and behold, I guess it was my last day there, and I'm in the library working, and librarian comes in and says, Henry, the president of the Hall of Fame, Ed Stack, has flown in from New York, and he'd like to talk to you. And of course, I knew immediately what he was going to talk to me about. And I walk in, and sorry to have to tell you this, but the balls were stolen. When? 5 years ago. 5 years ago. And you haven't notified the family?
Yeah.
You didn't notify Uncle Ed, who donated the balls? No, we thought, if it got any publicity, then it would encourage additional thefts from the Hall of Fame and, blah, 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 blah. So that was very disappointing and really stuck in our craw for many, many years, and really Mom especially. And Uncle Ed, very much like Walter, mild mannered. His attitude was, well, okay, things happen, whatever. Mom was furious and never forgave them, and just was angry, of course, as always, angrier at the cover up than the actual theft itself.
And to
So
keep that
fast
exhibition
forward,
open like that,
I'm sorry.
to keep that exhibition open, to keep that mahogany case on display and put a magazine article in there is just so absurd to me as a curator and an archivist myself. And like,
Yes.
why would you do that?
Yeah. Why would you do that? Yeah.
Crazy.
I
But
don't
long
know.
story short, we know.
Yeah. So fast forward, I become a collector in addition to my other research into Walter's life. And then I become a dealer after I wrote my book, and was kind of I'm still a fairly young guy, and okay, what am I going to do now? I had a background in running nightclubs, and I didn't particularly want to go back to that. Had kind of aged out of that. So I started setting up at shows. All of a sudden, the sports card and memorabilia hobby just took off. Got to be a big, big business. And I had my collection, and everybody's collection. You've got stuff, what we call selling off the bottom. You take the stuff that, you look around and, well, I can do without that. You know, that doesn't do it for me anymore. And you sell them to raise money when you need it. So I started setting up at shows and just really enjoyed it, and found out that I was very good at it. Every dealer of any stripe, you have to be a collector first. It's the only thing that really tells you. You can't get a degree in selling old sports memorabilia, because you have to know the market. It's all what to pay and what to sell for. So, and only experience will tell you that there's such a diverse uh, universe of cards and memorabilia. So anyway, uh, now in the 90s, the era of the big auctions with beautiful catalogs, 2,000 items, color photographs of each one, really in the big time. And It was 1998, I think, and there's a ball signed by Warren Harding, and I can see that there's an inscription. Oh my gosh, that's from the collection. Wow. So I contact the Hall of Fame. They contact the FBI, who already had set up a little division to deal with autograph forgeries and other crimes within this hobby that's got so much money flowing through it now. Mm-hmm. So they go after it. They recover that ball. To make a long story short, they end up recovering all of the baseballs and got them back to the Hall of Fame. And the Hall of Fame in 2001 invited me to come for the official FBI presentation of the baseballs back to the Hall of Fame. And oh, by the way, they called me and said, "Oh, by the way, Roger Clemens is giving us the jersey that he wore in breaking Walter Johnson's American League strikeout record. And would you like to come and help us, be part of that presentation?" So I take the train up to New York, and I sit with the Hall of Fame guys. I get to meet Roger Clemens. I'm in the dugout, and sitting there is Joe Torre, Don Zimmer, and Mel Stottlemyre. And as I pass by in the historic Yankees dugout, as I pass by, each one of them puts their hands out and says, "Hi, I'm Joe Torre. Hi, I'm Don Zimmer." And I'm like, "Hi, I'm Hank Thomas." Talk about Walter Johnson like. I mean, these guys, these guys are people too. So anyway, and then me and the Hall of Fame guys drove all night to the Hall of Fame to get back in time. And I got to know those guys, the Hall of Fame guys, Jeff Idelson and what was the president's name at the time? I'm having brain lag. But anyway, that was a wonderful thing. And then the next day, I'm there when the Hall of Fame gets the balls back. Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Did they ever find the original theft? Did they ever find who actually originally stole them?
Don't get me started.
Uh-oh. Never mind. Next time. Save it for the next one.
If you read the article.
Yeah.
And a great writer with the New York Daily News, Michael O'Keefe, wrote he did the research, and he really came up with the story. And It
Right.
it starts with a guy with a hefty bag full of stuff in 1975 or six, going around the show selling stuff. And one of the things that he had was this collection of baseballs. And
Big dog.
said, he said, yeah, his story was, yeah, I got these, a guy with a bag full of stuff, and he sold me those. And what are you going to do? So, but there's some those balls pass through a who's who
Right.
of the collecting and dealing hobby. And some of those guys knew what they had. And, just we're happy to to let them pass through. So,
Well, Hank, I am blown away by this. We have to do this again. You also
anytime.
to
How much fun do you think this
anytime.
is for me? This is there's one thing that I'm an expert
Yeah,
in
yeah,
this world.
right.
And, you can imagine, is there anything that I like to talk about more?
Well,
No.
this was a pleasure. I think we should still talk about you coming after the event. We
Yeah,
can
that would be
follow
really
up
cool.
on that.
Yes.
But Hank, thank you so much. This has been enlightening as always. Great to see you here. Linda, thank you for arranging this.
Oh, it's my
This
pleasure.
recording now is a new piece of history in the
Yep,
archive.
yep, 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 yep. We're going to share it in the booklet. We'll put a little bit of a transcript in the booklet with a QR code so folks can see the actual interview.
Wonderful.
Wonderful,
Thank you
wonderful.
so very
And let
much.
me
You,
know.
Hank.
I would like to be able to download this interview. To
Absolutely. I'll send it to you. I'll send it
great.
to you.
Okay,
And
take
my
care.
address so you can send me the postcard.
Yes,
Perfect.
absolutely.
Thank you
Hank,
so much.
Hank,
All
I'll
right.
reach out to you again too. I want to stay in touch with you as well.
Stop it.
Just fan to fan. We'll be in touch,
Stop
okay?
it.
I think you might have my email. If not, I'm happy to give it to you. Linda has it.
All
Yeah.
right, great.
Talk
This
to you
was great,
soon.
guys. I
Thank
enjoyed
Have a
you,
it.
wonderful
everybody.
day.
Take
Thank you.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.